My name is Jan McFarish. I am the Education and Events Director of the Free Speech Union, but I'm actually now wearing a different hat while I'm in this room, and that is as Visiting Research Fellow at the Centre for Parenting Culture Studies at the University of Kent, which is where I used to work with my colleague Ellie Lee, who's sitting down here at the front. And the Centre for Parenting Culture Studies is a partner on the whole strand of sessions throughout the day that are taking place in this room called Family Matters. And we're going to be exploring, to start with, this session, and then we're moving on to feeding babies, is breast always best? And then the crisis of childcare, who's holding the baby? And then a session on teenagers and screens. And then finally, at the end of the day, whose kids are they anyway? Reclaiming parental authority. So some really excellent sessions if you're interested in questions of the family. So you can keep coming back here. Obviously, you can range around the entire festival and go to whatever you like. So yes, this is the first of 5 sessions kicking off the day. And I know, obviously, it's a really popular session, which is great. So what we're going to be discussing today is the morality of surrogacy. We covered this topic at the Battle of Ideas back in 2018. Some of you may have been. Was anybody at that session? One. And Sarah. and me. I listened back to the recording of that session, which you might want to do afterwards, actually. And that was really interesting because during the audience Q&A, people were very undecided and they didn't really necessarily have strong opinions, hadn't really thought much about surrogacy. So it'd be very interesting to see if that's different today. And I suspect it may be, given the responses on Twitter when Ella shared details of this session, which were much more certain than they were back in 2018. So the reason for returning to the topic, there's two reasons we're doing that. One is that there are very important legal reforms to the laws that regulate surrogacy arrangements. And those reforms have been proposed as a result of a law commission consultation. Well, 2 consultations merged together, which cover Scotland and England and Wales. And this was produced earlier this year, I think. So far, the government hasn't acted on those proposals, but they're very interesting. And our panel are fully immersed in the discussions that have informed that consultation. So we've got real experts here on the kind of detail of the questions that have been posed to that commission and the things that are trying to be solved. The other reason for revisiting this, as I've kind of indicated already, is that the issue has inspired a greater level of interest and provoked probably a higher level of passion than I've ever noticed around surrogacy, and for reasons which, again, we'll explore in the session, but which seem to relate to other concerns or concerns that people have about and surrounding surrogacy, about the undermining of the unique experience and status of motherhood and womanhood, about the commodification of human relationships, the instrumentalization of the human body, especially women's bodies, global inequalities. All of those issues are thrown into the surrogacy pot, and there's a lot to pick through. We'll try to sort of separate them out a bit. So it's a very delicate issue, and there's lots of different facets. So I'm really delighted that we've got an expert panel to help us find our way through. So to start with, we're going to hear from Lexi Ellingsworth. Lexi is the co-founder of Stop Surrogacy Now UK, an organisation that was founded in 2019 in direct response to the UK Law Commission's public consultation that year on surrogacy law reform. We'll hear from Lexi first, and then we'll hear from Sarah Jones. Sarah is, and she was here at the last time we discussed this, Sarah is Chief Executive of the non-profit Surrogacy UK. She's a mother of 3 and has acted as a surrogate 5 times over the past 2 decades. She remains in close contact with all the families she's helped to create. And last time you revealed that you were actually taken as a show and tell entry to the school of one of the children you've given birth to. Sarah works to ensure that the voice of surrogates is heard in the process of legal reform. And then we have Gary Powell. Gary is the European Special Consultant with the US-based Centre for Bioethics and Culture and a research fellow in sexual orientation and gender identity with the Bow Group, which is a UK-based conservative think tank. And then we have Ella Whelan, who I can't believe has found the time to be here, but she's the co-convener of the Battle of Ideas Festival. She's a journalist, author of What Women Want, Fun, Freedom and an End to Feminism. She's also columnist for Spiked and writes regularly for The Telegraph, Spectator, amongst many other outlets. And you may have seen her on Question Time on BBC or heard her on the Moral Maze on Radio 4. So they're all very well equipped to help us explain and explore the morality of surrogacy. So we'll hear from the panel first, and then we'll come out for a very long, probably about an hour of Q&A from the audience. So that will be great. So let's go with Lexi. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you so much to Baroness Fox and Battle of Ideas for inviting me here today. My name is Lexi Ellingsworth, and I'm the co-founder of Stop Surrogacy Now UK, a grassroots campaign group which formed 4 years ago in direct response to a public consultation by the Law Commission to relax surrogacy laws in this country, an issue I will talk about more in a moment. Firstly, a word on language. We use mother as opposed to surrogate, as mother is not only a social term or even a moral term, but a legal term. The term surrogate is dehumanising in our view and erases what is actually happening in surrogacy pregnancies. Under the Children Act, as recently tested by the case of Freddie McConnell, a woman who gives birth is a mother, and this not only gives parental rights, but also responsibilities for the child. In the McConnell judgment and others from the family court, the term commissioning parents is used in surrogacy cases, and so we apply the same wording. By its very nature, surrogacy, the act of having a child for someone else, directly affects women and children. Women's bodies are used for our reproductive capabilities, and in every surrogacy arrangement, a newborn is taken from his or her mother at birth. We know about the mother-baby dyad and the fourth trimester from decades of research and straightforward common sense. Babies know their mothers. They know their heartbeats, voices, and even their smell from tasting amniotic fluid. A baby knows their mother and not the gametes they are conceived from. A surrogate-born baby does not know they are born through surrogacy. For those who haven't come across them, the Law Commission's new surrogacy pathway proposals give commissioning parents parental rights at birth, removing the surrogate mother from the birth certificate, cuts the time a surrogate mother has to change her mind to just 6 weeks. Even then, she will not have an automatic right to custody or access, even in cases where she has used her own egg, and would allow open advertising for surrogate mothers, meaning young women who may never have previously given thought to this will be drawn into it as demand grows. The Law Commission further proposes a minimum age of 18 for commissioning parents and just 21 for surrogate mothers. They do not require a mother to have previously given birth or completed her own family before embarking on a pregnancy for others. And they would allow for a woman to continue to use her own egg, meaning at the point of handover, the child is literally being taken away from his or her own genetic and birth mother. The youngest surrogate mother in the UK that we know of was a single mother aged 21. She became interested in surrogacy after watching a TV documentary and was matched with a couple through an agency. At first, she continued to have a relationship with the family and visited every birthday. But in a recent TV interview, she explained that she had lost contact with the children whilst they were still very young. The friendship model for her was not ongoing. In a small UK study of children born by surrogacy, by age 10, only 60% were still in touch with the surrogate mother. That's 40% having no contact by the time they reach puberty. We understand some claim the UK has a friendship first model, but in our review of submissions to the Law Commission's consultation, we found multiple examples of would-be commissioning parents saying that this is not what they wanted, they did not want a third parent, and they did not want an ongoing relationship with the mother of the child. One of the stated aims of reform is to dissuade UK commissioning parents from seeking surrogacy abroad, which the Commissions acknowledge can bring a greater risk of exploitation of women and children. Despite this, no changes are proposed for those bringing children into this country from international commercial surrogacy, and children who are conceived and carried this way will likely never see their birth mothers again. The proposals would continue to allow for gifts and recuperative holidays for the surrogate mother and her family. One woman's surrogate pregnancy was inspired by her own mother and her childhood memories of holidays they had as a result of her mother's multiple surrogacy pregnancies. So we are now starting to see surrogacy continue down the generations. Benefits offered by one agency include Apple products, theme park passes, and vouchers for an adult retailer. But money is not the only reason for women to engage in surrogacy. Some surrogate mothers had said themselves that it is addictive. One surrogate mother said she had low self-esteem and she wanted to prove she was a nice person. We believe women like this are at very real risk of coercion and exploitation. We know of women who have been pressured and groomed by their friends and family. A surrogate mother we have spoken to told us her motivations were to help, as this is something that she could do. She later recognised how the expectations of her were deeply rooted in her upbringing and being socialised as a young woman to be helpful and be kind. She referred to this as toxic femininity and now feels strongly that women, their eggs and their wombs are not a resource for others. We hear from women who have surrogacy regret, who find themselves ejected from private online groups when expressing doubts or a change of heart. When they find themselves bonding with their unborn baby, they are reminded they are just the oven for the bun, or told they are an extreme babysitter and not the mother. There is little study of surrogacy regret, but we have written about one study from 1994, which is entitled, "I wanted to be interesting. I wanted to be able to say I've done something interesting with my life." As the UK law had only been introduced less than a decade prior, and with the popularity of surrogacy at the time in no way reflecting the levels we have today, this could only serve as a snapshot in time, but also as a stark warning for the future. The issue of surrogacy goes to the heart of equality for women, seeing women as human beings and not body parts to be rented out or treated like commodities. Our reproductive capabilities are not to be capitalised on for the benefit of others. It remains an inconvenient truth that it is women who have babies and it is women who are mothers, and babies are not blank canvases but human beings with rights of their own. The Law Commission, pro-surrogacy lobbyists and surrogacy agencies would have you believe these reforms modernise an outdated law that simply needs clarifying, and that they improve safeguarding of children, when in reality they enable and legitimise, through state sanction, separating mothers and babies, which is in opposition to all NHS guidance and best practice and against the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. Surrogacy remains a subject many have concerns about. The Law Commission stated in their report that the majority of responses opposed most or all of our provisional proposals for reform and advocated instead for surrogacy to be prohibited. But they said that banning surrogacy is outside the terms of reference. You will hear arguments today about choice and rights to do with your own body what you want in a free society. Women can and should have rights over their own bodies, but not what is done with somebody else's, in this case, a newborn baby. The last few years have reminded us that laws are made for all of us. They are not meant to prioritise or satisfy a small section of society. Laws are intended to protect everyone and to uphold the rights of the most vulnerable. Lawmakers must balance the demands of a small number of adults with the rights of children and what we find to be acceptable in wider society. Thank you.
Thank you, Lexi. And now Sarah.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Sarah Jones, and I serve as the CEO of Surrogacy UK, a not-for-profit organisation dedicated to supporting those involved in UK surrogacy. I bring to this debate not just professional expertise, but also personal experience. For over 2 decades, I've been involved with surrogacy here in the UK, having acted as a surrogate on 5 separate occasions. The children born from these surrogacy journeys are now 20, 19, 12, 7 and 3. I share enduring relationships with each of these individuals and their families. They all know who I am and appreciate the unique bond we share. We're gathered here to discuss the morality of surrogacy, and while I anticipate points of agreement with my fellow panellists, I cannot subscribe to the notion that surrogacy cannot ever be conducted morally. In my view, when executed ethically and with the welfare of the child as the central focus, surrogacy can indeed be morally sound. In the UK, the cornerstone of ethical surrogacy is distinct from models seen elsewhere in the world. Here, and especially at Surrogacy UK, surrogacy is built on the bedrock of friendship, mutual respect, and the expectation of enduring openness and a relationship with the surrogate after the child is born. We firmly believe that ethical surrogacy is inherently tied to an altruistic model. The children born through this process should grow up knowing that their existence came about through a compassionate friendship rather than a mere transaction. This orientation towards the process naturally places the well-being of the child at the forefront. When we speak about the child's well-being, we're referring to safeguarding their emotional, physical, and psychological welfare above all else. Both the surrogate and the intended parents are consenting adults fully aware of the implications of their choices. It's the child's rights and welfare that require vigilant protection. I firmly believe that ethical surrogacy can coexist with robust protections for the children involved. My aim today is not only to present the facts, but also to alleviate some of the common concerns that people hold about surrogacy. At this juncture, it's important to clarify a really crucial point. I don't believe that anyone inherently has a right to a child, be it intended parents, a surrogate, or any other woman that gives birth. A child is an individual in their own right, not an object to be owned. Their unique individual rights must always be the highest priority. While you may hear compelling arguments from my fellow panellists about the potential pitfalls of surrogacy, you might be surprised to learn that I concur with many of their concerns. This is because I too am firmly against commercial surrogacy that prioritise the desires of intended parents over the well-being of the child, or exploit surrogates who feel they have no choice but to participate. However, it's crucial to differentiate between these global practices and what happens here in the UK. The UK model of surrogacy distinguishes itself through its ethical and child-centred framework, a stark contrast to the commercial and exploitative models we see elsewhere. One common misconception stubbornly persists, that altruistic surrogacy is a myth, and that ultimately babies are commodified while surrogates monetise their bodies. This perception is not only misleading but unjust. Surrogates in the UK are reimbursed only for their actual out-of-pocket expenses, which are reviewed by the courts during the legal process. Far from opposing this legal scrutiny, we welcome the forthcoming legal reforms which will more strictly regulate expenses. It's worth noting that the assumption that surrogates must be financially motivated often says more about the accuser's own biases and values than about the ethical framework in which UK surrogates operate. Contrary to popular belief, surrogates in the UK do not wish to be paid. In fact, during the recent consultation with the Law Commission, our surrogate community actively campaigned to maintain the altruistic nature of UK surrogacy. If we wanted to be paid, that would have been the time to push for commercialisation. We didn't. Those who allege expenses are inflated to generate a profit are woefully misunderstanding of the very nature of these costs. When discussing the morality of surrogacy, it's crucial to consider the outcomes for children born through this process. You might hear emotionally charged language, phrases like children ripped from their mothers. Such descriptions are crafted to provoke an emotional response, so let's dispel those notions. Contrary to such imagery, births in UK surrogacy journeys occur in the presence of the parents. The baby is lovingly placed into the arms of its genetic mother or father, establishing immediate skin-to-skin contact, all while the surrogate is right there supporting this moment. Far from experiencing trauma, the child is enveloped in love from 3 very special people in its very first seconds of life. Comparisons are often made with adoption, which is fundamentally a different situation. In surrogacy, the child grows up with their genetic parents, wanted, planned for, and surrounded in an environment of love with an ongoing connection with their surrogate. Furthermore, we have UK-specific studies showing that children born through surrogacy here tend to have better than average outcomes. In conclusion, surrogacy is a complex and deeply personal journey that quite rightly demands ethical scrutiny. However, when conducted in a manner that puts the child's well-being front and centre, it is not only ethical, but also profoundly transformative. We must not allow the conversation to be dominated by extreme perspectives or by models that do not apply to the specific context here in the UK. Let us strive for a balanced discourse that appreciates these nuances, rather than a one-size-fits-all condemnation or indeed endorsement. The children born from surrogacy journeys in the UK are not mere outcomes of transactions. They are loved, wanted, and welcomed into their own families that could be created no other way. Thank you for giving me your attention today, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you.
Harry. Good morning. I'm a gay man. I've been a gay rights activist since 1980. I'm also an atheist, so my opposition to surrogacy does not come from a belief in God. I oppose all forms of surrogacy for all people, gay or straight, single or coupled. My primary moral objection is the potential harm it causes to children. It's unacceptable for a vulnerable newborn to be taken away from their mother at birth. We don't even do that to puppies. The Kennel Club says not for 6 to 8 weeks minimum. Babies need protection. We simply don't know what impact this separation will have on them, so we should err on the side of caution. Genealogical bewilderment is also a risk, going through life without the normal sense of being anchored in a biological family history, and the child might wonder for the rest of their life how their birth mother could have given them away. The unconscious, primordial messaging communicated might be that they are unlovable and defective, not good enough. This kind of wounding of a child is primal and resistant to rational exegesis. Mother-child attachments, shaped by millions of years of evolution, are a force to be reckoned with. The child might also go through life feeling like a purchasable commodity. In overt commercial surrogacy, as well as in so-called altruistic surrogacy, money changes hands and the state pays out as well. That's a really important point. The state pays out as well. There is no universal human right to be a parent. I support gay parenting, such as via adoption or fostering, but not surrogacy. Big fertility, including the surrogacy industry, has hijacked the gay rights movement. Surrogacy is being legitimised in our name, with the justification that it provides gay men with their own biological children. The surrogacy lobby has found a fruitful partner in the LGBT plus gender lobby, which has also hijacked the gay rights movement. The big cause is now gender identity, before which we're all expected to bend a knee and which has nothing to do with being gay. As a result of its forced teaming today with two harmful causes, the gay rights movement is being caused global reputational harm. This reputational damage is setting global gay rights back by decades. It provides ammunition to homophobic governments abroad. Look at the harm the Western LGBT plus movement is causing, they can cry. And they can use this as an excuse for keeping homosexuality criminalised and making things even worse for their gay citizens. The High Court recently assessed the cost of so-called altruistic surrogacy in the UK to be around £37,000. Working-class gay men normally can't afford that kind of money, and overt commercial surrogacy in California costs six-figure sums. Surrogacy is a bogus gay right for wealthy gay men. Surrogacy also causes harm to women. Altruistic surrogacy in the UK is nothing less than lower-paid and disguised commercial surrogacy. So-called reasonable expenses can be £18,000 and higher. On top of that, birth mothers are entitled to statutory maternity pay or allowance and maternity leave, even though they will have no baby to look after. An added incentive, thank you very much, taxpayer. And also the new recommendations of the Law Commission are that one of the commissioning parents should be given maternity or paternity pay or allowance as well. As for the bodily autonomy or reproductive autonomy argument, none of us has the right to use our body in a way that harms another person or society as a whole. We are not allowed to sell our kidneys, and we should not be allowed to sell our babies, or even have babies for the sole purpose of giving them away. Human organ sales are illegal across the globe. Only Iran permits it. It's illegal even though people will die as a result of not being able to buy a kidney. But no one will die as a result of not being able to pay for a baby. And unlike a kidney, a baby has rights of his or her own. Surrogacy and living human organ sales create a poor harvesting class and a rich purchasing class, a dehumanized, ugly society. When women die during the surrogacy process, the death just gets recorded as amniotic embolism or something similar. We don't know how many women surrogacy kills. And far from sensationalising the complications and the reporting on the deaths, the pro-surrogacy media regularly churn out celebrity puff pieces that promote surrogacy as exciting and high status. But this gift of life can also be a gift of death. Surrogacy pregnancies are more likely to be higher risk pregnancies, both to the mothers and to the babies. Even normal births, spontaneous births, put mothers at risk of death. When surrogacy mothers die, they orphan their children and widow their partners. It is reproductive Russian roulette. Some people win at Russian roulette, and for them it has a great outcome, and they encourage others to play. But the largely invisible losers lose very badly indeed. The multi-billion-dollar global surrogacy industry has very effective marketing. Transgenderism is providing it with a new bank of customers. These are transgender-identified people who have been sterilised by puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones and surgeries. LGBT plus rights, transgenderism and surrogacy. Follow the money. In surrogacy, the birth mother becomes instrumentalized and commodified. Like prostitution, it will draw in women in need of money who wouldn't do it if they didn't have to, or women under pressure from coercive partners or families. And does it really serve a woman's reproductive rights so well when she surrenders them to womb renters via a surrogacy contract? And do not reproductive rights also imply reproductive responsibilities? Surrogacy contracts create psychological suffering and crises for women. What if the commissioning parents demand an abortion she doesn't want to have, or vice versa? There is also regret. The birth mother may discover she doesn't want to hand over the baby. She might discover during the pregnancy that the commissioning parents are actually really horrible people, that she doesn't want to bring up the child. Birth mothers sometimes grieve over and worry about the child for years after finding this out. I've spoken to one. Let's stand up for children's rights, women's rights, and the reputation of the global gay rights movement that has urgent work to do, but that has been hijacked by bad players. Let's say no, please, to surrogacy.
Thank you, Gary. Bang on time so far, everybody.
Let's see if I ruin the track record. So for me, I think it's pretty clear that banning surrogacy would be an affront to women's freedom and an affront to women's bodily autonomy. And I stand in great sympathy and solidarity with people who are shocked and appalled by the attacks on language used around women and motherhood, and the insanity of a kind of gender neutralizing of everything to do with that particular part of a woman's life, whether it's sort of maternity documents in hospitals or the way politicians talk about women. There is definitely something going on with the way in which we discuss motherhood and the way in which we discuss women. And Jan's right that actually something very real has changed since the previous debate that the Battle of Ideas did on surrogacy. That's the terrain we're working in at the moment, where I think a lot of people have become hardened and I don't want to use the word radicalized, but certainly have lost a significant amount of nuance, rightly or wrongly, about the question of surrogacy because of the attacks on women and motherhood. However, I don't think we should throw the baby out with the bathwater, to use a terrible term. I think that there is missing in all of this the fundamental question for a woman who is potentially going to get pregnant and potentially carry through that pregnancy. And that is whether or not she has the freedom to make choices about her own body throughout the pregnancy, whether or not she has the freedom to act with her own conscience, make her own decisions. And I'm quite alarmed by some of the language my fellow panelists have used throughout this discussion. You know, women have rights, but women can make decisions, but judgments about what kind of right or wrong decisions women can make about their own lives and their own bodies. Funnily enough, we're not angels. Lots of us make decisions that we later come to regret, that other people might find distasteful or even immoral. But there are our decisions, and we are supposed to be the ones that make them. This debate reminds me a lot of abortion, and Gary mentioned prostitution, which might be, uncomfortable discussions to be brought into something that's primarily about children being brought into the world. But obviously the key train of thought in all of those that they all share is the question of women's bodily autonomy, and is the question of who is really in charge of a woman's body. Is it the state? Is it some other group of people? Or is it the woman herself? And I'm afraid you can't use the term women's rights and children's rights in the same sentence as if they blend into one another. Particularly if you think about the discussion about abortion, those are very different things. And for me, the woman always comes first because it's her body and her choice to use that old term. So regardless of your feelings on surrogacy, I'm pro it in the abstract, but I think that it's telling that the way in which we engage in this discussion focuses on, and this has been represented today, what's deemed to be natural, what's deemed to be in line with our animalistic nature. I think Gary used the word primordial, our primal sense of things. And that makes my hair stand on end, because obviously
many of you women in the audience might have had this experience too. I wasn't exactly a natural mother, and my baby was implanted. He was lifted out of me when I was knocked out. We didn't do skin-to-skin contact, which is an utter nonsense that's been invented, as if kids forget who loves them and don't have a good upbringing unless they're plastered on their tired mother's chest after she's been given birth. The fourth trimester, I think, is also an utter nonsense. We're not puppies, Gary. We're human beings. And the good thing about being a human being is that we have evolved and innovated around manipulating nature. Nature does not restrain us. It does not restrict us. We do things to nature. From a woman's point of view, it's very important that we are able to do that in terms of making decisions about pregnancy, whether it's abortion or anything else. In terms of people who are infertile, like I was, being able to use and manipulate nature to get what we want, which in my case was my lovely son. Tying women to what is natural is therefore quite clearly to me a problem. But this never gets talked about in relation to men, funnily enough, and obviously for discussions about pregnancy. But why have we lost that kind of feeling when people start talking about women as, Gary and Alexia have discussed it as women as sort of womb renters, but I don't much like the other side of the debate, which is the idea that if a woman gives birth, that's it. She's the mother. She must devote herself skin to skin and everything else to that child forevermore. It leaves out dads, it leaves out adoptive parents, and it also positions women in this kind of, I think, quite reactionary position as being tied to nature. There are lots of choices that women make about their bodies, and indeed there are lots of the potential in the realm of surrogacy for regret, for mistake, for bad things to happen, for bad relationships to break down. It seems to me not beyond the realm of normal legal procedures that is mitigated in a similar way to adoption or whatever like that. I'm not sort of standing here saying, free for all, go out on the street and sell your body to whoever's the first customer. But I think, there is a line, you have to take a position on women's freedom, which I take, which is that I am for women having abortions as early as possible, as late as necessary. I think that prostitution should be decriminalized, that women should be able to make that choice for themselves. And in relation to surrogacy, I think that if you believe that women should be in control over their own bodies, you should take a similar position of allowing that to happen and women to make those decisions where it is appropriate to them. So, I think that we have to look and say, why are we having this discussion today? What is our problem with surrogacy? Is it because there are these awful videos circling on social media of, as some people have described it, in particular, unfortunately, it happens to be obsequious California gay couples unboxing babies and sort of doing these awful hospital videos where they don't, in one of them criticizing the surrogate mother for not waxing, disgusting things and behavior that is pretty abhorrent. Is then our view to attack women's liberation, attack women's bodily autonomy, try and pull women back to some position of being inherently natural and therefore restricted? Or should we talk about what's going on in our culture more generally and ask the more difficult questions? I think that surrogacy here is being weaponized and used as a means to fight other battles that are important about gender identity, gender ideology, all the rest of that nonsense, all the attacks on women's rights. I think those are things that we should talk about. But unfortunately, the people who are losing out in this attack on surrogacy are women, and it's women's freedom that I will stand up for.
Thank you very much. Fantastic. Well, I think you've got the full range of views there, but no doubt there's other things that we've missed or haven't covered so far. So do feel free to ask direct questions, factual questions or otherwise of the panel. They have immersed themselves in the legal discussions, so you can ask them questions about how surrogacy works here in particular, but equally anything else you want to raise. But if you can just keep them, everybody can be fairly brief, we'll get everybody in. So where's the microphone person? Great, thank you. Kathy, if we just start over this side, so they're right down the front actually. And if people who are sitting on the floor want to come and sit over on the my right-hand side, there's chairs and stripy top here. I'll just take a few and then we'll come back.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. My name is Vanda Nagy and I am a law student from Hungary. And I would like to ask you that I have taken part in a human rights moot court competition, and the case was there, the competition case, about a surrogate mother who, in the birth room, regretted to sign a contract with the parents and wanted to keep her child. And how can it be legally and morally handled when a woman regrets her decision like this? And can she actually keep her child, or what kind of procedures can be taken in this situation? Thank you so much.
What country was that?
Hungary.
Oh, that was in Hungary. Was it?
No. It was in a fictional country where the surrogacy was allowed legally.
There is a hypothetical.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Right. Lady in the burgundy top here.
Hi there. Thank you so much to the panel for some really interesting discussions there. I'm interested, generally speaking, in the impact that changing the laws around surrogacy might have on culture. We think about the Overton window. If surrogacy were to become more normalised in the UK and perhaps in other countries in the West, what impact might that have on culture? And for instance, would that mean that we start to remove our understanding more broadly of that unique relationship between mother and child, and start to see childbirth as something that can happen in perhaps even less further removed ways, such as, you know, eventually the idea of babies being born in a pod or things like that? Is that something that could be a consequence? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. And one more. If you're in the middle section, okay, the lady with the red sleeve.
Hi, I'm just wondering if there's any information available as to whether the growing surrogacy rates in the UK is affecting adoption.
Okay, thank you. Sarah, do you want to just answer this factual question about how a surrogate who regrets would be treated in the UK?
So at the minute, if a surrogate doesn't want to sign the parental order, she doesn't have to. She has to sign of her own free will. She has to consent without coercion to be able to sign that parental order. Now, because in the UK, one or both of the intended parents must be genetically related to the child, it's like in any other family legal situation, it would go to court and the courts would decide, you know, what's in the best interest of that child. So that would be handled the same as any other sort of family, you know, dispute, I suppose. With the law reforms, actually, the law reforms give more chance for a surrogate to withdraw her consent. There are many more stages within the process that a surrogate can withdraw her consent. So actually, the law reforms give surrogates much more choice of when they can consent. At the moment, they have one option. They have one time where they can consent or not consent. With the law reform, they're given multiple times to withdraw their consent.
Thanks. Yes, Lexi, you probably see that differently.
Thank you. So it's true that in the current situation in the UK that a surrogate mother would be required to go to court if she wanted to change her mind. She would be able to not sign their parental order, but obviously there would be debate from the commissioning parents, so they would go to court over that. And there is a case of a surrogate mother who signed the parental order, but that was essentially overturned because she did not give free and informed consent, and that was a decision in January in the Highgate Family Court this year. In addition to that, I wanted to say that under the reforms, the surrogate mother is able to withdraw her consent up to and including birth. And then in the 6 weeks that follows, she would need to launch a legal case. So at the time when she's obviously hormonal, you know, having given birth, she would need to take legal advice and proceed down that road. The commissioning parents would obviously be wanting to have their own say in this as well, because they would have the genetic relationship, as Sarah says. So in the current situation and under reform, a legal action would be required for the surrogate mother to regain custody or have access to her child. It wouldn't be simply that she would be able to change her mind, and that would be all there is to it.
I think just to come back on that, it's also the legal fight that the surrogate would have to do in the new reforms is that she would have to apply for a parental order. So it just, it puts that's the process that she would go through, the process that currently intended parents go through.
Right, so it puts the boot on the other foot, and that's quite a big shift then, by the sounds of things. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you. This issue of the birth mother withdrawing consent, it just underlines what an absolute minefield surrogacy is, a moral minefield, medical minefield, psychological minefield, because the child that the birth mother is carrying doesn't contain any of her own genetic material. And the genetic parents are not she, they are the commissioning parents. So if she decided that she didn't want to hand that child over, you've got the moral quandary, because you can argue that she is not the parent of that child, even though she's given birth to the child, that the commissioning parents are. So I would actually have sympathy for the commissioning parents. Once the process has started, this is why I think it shouldn't start in the first place. It's a complete mess, absolute moral minefield. So once she started that process, she's carrying somebody else's child. There's a big issue if she decides she doesn't want to hand that child over. And the commissioning parents are in a very strong position to say that almost unconditionally, the child, unless there's an indication there's going to be some kind of abuse or neglect of the child, that the child should be handed over. So I think the solution for this is for the law to make sure that these situations don't arise in the first place, because the people who end up suffering most are the mothers who've gone into this, perhaps in a situation of economic need, not realizing how terrible the outcomes are going to be. Like this situation, for instance, if the commissioning parents say, the child has got a defect of some kind, we want the child aborted, she might have signed the contract thinking she could go ahead with an abortion, but then discover at the time when she's pregnant, she can't do it. And then what about that quandary? If she decides to have the baby to full term, then she is the mother, though after the law is changed, if it is, the commissioning parents will be the parents. Who makes this decision about whether a child is aborted? So I think this kind of moral minefield is something that human beings should be spared. And I don't think it has very much to do with women's bodily autonomy. I think, of course, fertility autonomy, bodily autonomy, that's one of the arguments in the pot. But there is such a thing as the human rights of other people, the human rights of children. And it can't be the case that bodily autonomy of women must always override any human rights that anybody else in a category other than women may have.
Can I just come back on her? Let me just bring Ella in, if you don't mind. Ella.
I do think that women's bodily autonomy should trump everything else. It's interesting just to use the abortion debate quickly again, although I know there's obviously very separate things happening. At the moment, there's this big row happening with a disability rights campaigner who is trying to suggest that any abortion related to, you say, whether you find out that a pregnancy has Down syndrome or something like that, women should be prevented from making that choice, even should be prevented from testing for certain conditions, because a woman's decision to have an abortion in a situation like that with the diagnosis is an affront to the human rights of disabled people, the rights of disability rights. So obviously, once you get into the rights discussion, you get into the weeds, which is why I always use the language of autonomy and freedom, because it's final. And women's bodily autonomy for me is final. She is the only one who should make a decision around abortion or something like that. But I just wanted to pick up on briefly on the sort of regret legal quandary that you could get into. I don't think anyone here would sit and say, oh, no problem, you just sort it out in the courts. That would obviously be an intensely painful and sort of troubling process to go through. But we're sort of, not to be sort of flippant, but there, like Sarah says, there are cases where it goes right, and there are cases where people are happy, quite a lot actually. And I think if we lose the nuance in this and suggest that people should be spared from making decisions in case they make the wrong decisions or go on to regret them, that is an overreach from a government and a state that I'm deeply uncomfortable with, particularly in relation to women's ability to make decisions for themselves. The babies in pods or bags thing is fascinating to me, because I think a lot of us, when we think about a future in which babies would be grown external to a human body, a woman's body, and all kind of sort of science fiction films and novels that have been written about that, we think, oh, terrible. And maybe that's the case, but it's also true that I lived off Rennies throughout my pregnancy and it was miserable. I did not enjoy it. I've certainly enjoyed my son, but the process of pregnancy wasn't great to me. So when anyone ever says babies in bags, I think maybe for the next one, And that's not me being stupid. It's saying that there are, pregnancy, as Gary pointed out, is deeply dangerous. In fact, actually, a lot of people point out the fact that it's much safer for a woman to have an abortion than it is to take a baby to full term, because the risks can be great and women do die in pregnancy and childbirth. This is not something to be taken lightly. I think anything, and we're doing this in a debate later on in the day called Making Babies in the Lab, which you should all go to, which is, I think that anything that has the potential for medicine, science, innovation, tech to give a better quality of life to human beings and provide more choice and more options, then that's a good thing. The challenge is for us to then come along and think, what are the moral quandaries there and how do we make a good situation out of this? We're not going to be able to sort of invent or tech our way out of these issues. But to me, I'm uncomfortable with the revulsion for any kind of meddling with nature, because the end point of that is women are forever to be the ones who deal with all these issues and deal with all these problems and deal with all these dangers. And, we know that when we jump into bed with each other, that potentially you're going to end up with a baby. But I think anything that challenges the idea that women are solely responsible, naturally, primordially, or whatever else for children is a good thing for women's freedom, or perhaps a productive thing.
Okay, I'm going to come out to the floor again, and then I know there's various things left hanging. Question about adoption, and then we are addressing the cultural shift. It will keep on coming up. So yes, oh my goodness, slow. Right, lady, where's the microphone? Yeah, thanks, Kathy. Down here. We will come further back.
Hi, I'm Jan from Object. Great to hear you all speak. I agree with all of you to some degree. I think it's very important, and I'm surprised you haven't covered it in the panel, to look at the more dangerous sort of pregnancy that any kind of surrogate pregnancy is. I've heard figures of 2.5 times as dangerous as normal pregnancy. I'm not a medical person, but there are people who could speak on that.
Why would that be?
Because you're introducing foreign body into the woman if you're implanting an egg from somebody else. Also, egg collection and so on. We don't even collect statistics, I think, as Gary said, on deaths from surrogacy. I understand that there are 3 women who have died from surrogacy, Crystal Wilhite, Michelle Reeves and Brooke Brown, but their deaths weren't recorded, as Gary said, as related to surrogacy. They were related to pregnancy. So I think it's very, very important that we start keeping accurate statistics on these things.
They were in the UK?
No, they weren't in the UK. We don't. It was in America, but even so, there's a similar system there. I think it's very important that we listen to the medical side and consider the risk, the physical risk, as Ella said, about birth, but also about the increased risk. If there's an older parent, I understand the government doesn't propose any age limits on surrogacy, and obviously pregnancy gets more dangerous as you get older, as I know to my cost. So I think it's great that we're having this debate, and there's a lot more that needs to come out. I did some research on this, and I was surprised to find 60 reasons to be cautious about surrogacy. So there's a lot more to come out.
Thank you very much. If we just go to the lady next.
Hi, this is Mariana from Mexico. I just have a quick question. Let's say that you stop surrogacy in the UK. Have you ever thought of the impact that this will have in the global south? And do you think there is actually free will for women who are in economic necessity? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And we will take another. Yeah, Ellie here.
I just wanted to. Gary was
really speaking.
Gary was very clear on his position on a complete outright ban. Lexi, could you just clarify whether that's what you're saying too? Whether you're saying that surrogacy altogether should just be illegal? The other thing that I just wanted to raise, just because I think it's a very interesting component of the discussion, where a lot of this discussion can seem really new, but there's a lot of the themes which I think are very, very old ones. So, for example, the slippery slope discussion, going against nature. I mean, this goes right back to the beginning of assisted conception. A lot of the stories raised about how dangerous this was going to be medically and for society. And I think we need to be very, very careful about going down this road, because the development of assisted conception has been a huge bonus for society. It really is a terrific advance. And I agree with Ella that one part of this, that people really need to not get carried away with it. And at the front, there was this slippery slope. Well, if this happens, then what this happens? Well, you can create legislative frameworks if people pursue this, which restrict very important things for people. So I think there's a lot of caution with that. And I think equally the regret, my question, is really what moral status does anybody really want to give to regret? All reproductive decisions involve regret. Women regret having children. Women regret having abortion. People regret getting married. People regret getting divorced. Family life is full of regret. It's also full of happiness. If you try and risk averse making families, well, it's maybe one reason why people aren't having very many babies anymore, because they're worried about having them because they think they might regret it or it might go wrong. And that broader context, I think, is an important one. So I would definitely, my caution would be in turning regret and worries about what might go wrong into the cultural trend. And I think it's a very strong cultural trend already.
Okay, thanks, Ellie. We'll take one more as well on the front while we're on the front. Ellie, pass it to your right, your left.
Thanks, everyone. This is really interesting. And I do kind of agree with everyone in a way. But I just wanted to talk about unintended consequences, because I think we're always at a point in history where we think we know it all, where we are now. And the last sort of 50 years or even 100 years, there's things we know now that we didn't know then. And, you know, for example, like fatherlessness, you know, I mean, it's only seemed to be more of a recent discussion that it has an effect on young people, especially in sort of poor areas, not having a dad around. Whereas sort of maybe 20, 30 years ago, it was like, it's fine, we don't need dads, you know. And I just think that we should be, as you said, really, really careful about, you know, what we're doing here. And I don't think the government should be sort of legislating what women do with their bodies. And I think that if a woman makes that decision, I think she should be free to do that. However, I just think that we don't know. Do we have any research on surrogates who have grown up and become adults, and how they feel about that, and the idea of an egg coming from somewhere else and maybe a sperm coming from somewhere else and growing in another person's body? As much as I kind of agree with what you're saying, but I do kind of think there's someone asked me to be a surrogate in my 30s, a friend of mine, and I felt really weirded out and creeped out by it, whereas all my friends were telling me I should take it as a compliment. And I just felt really, it just made me feel very, very strange and weird, and it just felt wrong to me. Okay. So there is some instinctual stuff going on there that I don't think we should completely ignore, you know?
Okay. Yeah, I mean, we can come to the sort of you can call it instinct, or you can call it kind of existing moral frameworks for how we understand the bringing of babies into the world, which clearly is a very special and deep thing. So, but is there an attempt to sort of re-sacralize, make sacred again, sperm, eggs, uteruses through this particular discussion that isn't necessarily very helpful? So, Lexi, do you want to pick up on any of the questions so far?
Yes. So
do you answer the ban question?
Should we go? Yeah. Which one?
Start with the just direct question of: do you actually want surrogacy now to be banned in the UK?
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So we don't think it's ethical for a woman to give away a child, whether she is genetically related to that child or not. Obviously, if it's her own egg, she would be the genetic as well as the birth mother, and we don't think it's ever really ethical.
So is she doing something unethical?
Is she doing something unethical? I think the act is unethical. And I think that if she decides to do that, that she's obviously using her body autonomy, but that the baby themselves also has rights and should, under various legislation and sort of a moral understanding, that the baby should be with the mother.
What rights do you think the baby has that are undermined by being given away?
The UN Convention on the Rights of the Child has articles in there that says that they should, the child should be raised with their parents unless they're at risk. And we have the Children's Act, where the woman who gives birth is the mother, and she has responsibilities to that child as well as rights. So under that legislation, I would say that there was an ethical connection between, and the mother baby died and everything that I've discussed in terms of what we know about the fourth trimester. That's been studied. That's something that's recognised.
So just Sorry. So just out of interest, following on that point, so a woman can't choose to have her own child adopted if she wants to. There must be a safeguarding reason for a woman to say, actually, I feel adoption is the right choice for me. There must be a safeguarding reason.
So I think in terms of adoption, as you said, they're very different things, and we see them as very different things. But ultimately, a child is normally at risk, and there is a safeguarding issue. If a woman wants to give up her baby, then she is essentially deciding that she doesn't want to be a mother. So there's a body autonomy argument in there. But if the child is, social services will ultimately try to keep the mother and the child together in case of adoption, unless there's a risk to the child. So the child is prioritised.
But there are plenty of women that go through pregnancy with the intention that that child's going to be adopted. They don't want to be a
private adoption.
In terms of any adoption, there's children go into the system for safeguarding reasons, absolutely. But there is a cohort of women that go through their pregnancy and go, I don't want to be a mother at the moment. I'm choosing adoption.
Well, obviously, if they were past the point at which they could have an abortion legally in this country, and adoption was the option for them, then they would have a difficult decision to make. But that there is no safeguarding. I mean, obviously, a woman who doesn't want to be a mother, there probably is a safeguarding risk to that child. So I'd say there would be safeguarding considerations, and the social workers would need to take care, obviously be involved. And adoption goes, the process by which you become adoptive parent is very different to the process by which you become a commissioning parent and ultimately the legal parent of a child through surrogacy. So the adoptive parents go through sometimes years, obviously, of waiting, but also of assessment. So they're very different processes. But to come back to the question, which was
about the ban.
Whether there's a ban. So we wouldn't necessarily say that there should be a ban, but we would say that the ethical question and that these reforms proposed by the law commissions are not the right ones, and we would want to explore those further.
Yeah, it's just that this is starting to sound very much like a woman has to be the right kind of woman and make the right kind of decisions in order to be what deemed acceptable in your eyes. And I think that there's, we know that until you are pregnant, you just don't know how you're going to feel about anything.
Yeah, but Ella, there is a difference though, isn't there, between consciously choosing a pregnancy, like a surrogate,
yes,
and accidentally getting pregnant or changing your mind while you're pregnant because, and then having an abortion. They're totally different. They're very different.
Of course. I'm not trying to conflate the two, but we're in the discussion that was just had about the moment of it potentially handing that child over or whatever. There is this talking about the idea that it should only be done if there's a safeguarding issue, or there needs to be certain, I don't know, tick boxes that a woman has to meet. Reminds me of to come back to the abortion debate. At the moment in this country, it's only legal for a woman to have abortion if she essentially convinces two doctors that she's either at physical risk or she's going mad, which for the vast majority of women who are in that position isn't necessarily true. So we should be careful of the kind of the legal desire to try and put in place into this position tick boxes that women have to meet. But I just wanted to there is this... Does no one, maybe a man in the audience can get up and say something, or a dad, because the thing that the outcome of all of this for me, I start to feel really bad for dads, and I start to feel really bad for people who, and that's coming from a position of an absolutist one on women's freedom and women's bodily autonomy. But when we talk about things like the fourth trimester or skin to skin contact, or the idea that there is this, that essentializing the idea of the mother-baby dyad being this sort of like totally physical primordial thing is really bad news for fathers. If we say in a sort of civilized modern society that parenting, well, at least I believe that parenting should be shared, should be a thing that's, I still go.
Okay, so Ella, I'm going to ask you now then, what do you think about a single man, gay or straight, commissioning a surrogate where there is then going to be no mother?
Well,
as currently possible.
Yeah, and I don't, in the abstract, I don't have a particular problem with it, because I don't think that a child who is raised without a mother, without being breastfed, without being, being put on her mother's naked chest seconds after birth, is damaged. I don't think that it is a absolute position that therefore that child will be raised somehow lesser than a child who was raised with a birth mother. Are we not just losing the position, the kind of question of nature or nurture? I side with nurture. There's a lot of fairly damaging discussions being had, not least by my least favourite woman in the world, Kate, Princess of whoever she is, and the royals, about an obsession with early years and the idea that everything that happens to a literal newborn, and I've just gone through this so I know, is will stay with them for the rest of their life. So if you don't do skin to skin, or if you don't do tummy time with your bawling 2-week-old who hates it, then then means that child at 27 is going to tell their therapist what a witch his or her mother was.
Okay.
I mean, come on.
Yeah, although you could also say that we're not just talking early weeks and months. You're talking about creating a child with a life that is forever. They are forever the child of surrogacy, aren't they? It's not just about what happens.
But not to sound too kumbaya, but I mean, what love and nurture is probably the thing that I'd be most concerned with, rather than genetics and biology.
Gary.
Yes, thank you. First of all, there's a paper published by my colleagues in California, Jennifer Lal et al., called A Comparison of American Women's Experiences with Both Gestational Surrogate Pregnancies, Spontaneous Pregnancies as Non-Surrogate Pregnancies. That's published in the journal Dignity, peer-reviewed. And what Jan was saying earlier on is absolutely right. Script is very small, but oh my gosh. We found, there were just lots of points. Surrogate pregnancy had from the abstract, had 3 times higher odds of resulting in a caesarean section, 5 times more likely to deliver at an earlier gestational age. Women in the study significantly more likely to experience postpartum depression following the delivery of surrogate children than after delivering their non-surrogate children. Overall, they're more likely to have adverse outcomes during a surrogate pregnancy. There's much more there as well, but I'd recommend that paper to you. But a point that I'd really like to make is that I feel, listening to Ella, whose opinions on many issues I greatly respect, I feel as though I'm hearing something like social Darwinism, where this idea of the absolute autonomy of women's fertility, decisions over their own body, as though that should trump absolutely everything else. Why? Somebody is missing from this table today, and that is the child. That is the baby who cannot speak. The baby who cannot speak, who might have been bought, might handed over to people, wondering their whole lives. If I can have a moment just for a very, very short anecdote. This thing about genealogical bewilderment, or this idea of primordial harm done to babies. I know about that from personal experience. I'll be very brief, but I came into the world in very, very tragic circumstances, and I found out about it when I was young through overhearing conversations. My parents had a little girl before they had me who died at 6 months old, Susan, and she died as a result of hospital negligence. And her mum and dad were absolutely devastated, of course, and their doctor said, what you've got to do is have another baby immediately. And I am that other baby. I'm a rainbow baby. I replaced somebody who died. And when I found that out, and I was probably about 3 or 4 years old when it was told to me, it was told to me in a positive way, I then felt as if I'd come into the world through the back door, as if I didn't really, my existence here wasn't really justified. And I asked myself, what would have been better if Susan hadn't died? Or if she had died and I've come into existence. So I had that quandary from a child, and that has stayed with me my whole life. And that's one of the reasons why I spend so much time on this campaign, because I think if babies come into the world in an unusual way, with some unpleasant background, this can have a devastating consequence for them in their unconscious. It is primordial.
Okay, thanks, Gary. You could say that the conclusion from that is that families can mess up children in all kinds of ways, no matter how the conception comes about as the kind of counterpart. Sarah?
So I am going to talk about this because two of my surrogate babies are adults now. So I can speak on what those adults through surrogacy now feel. And I would say probably of all the panel, I probably know more people born through surrogacy and have close relationships with those children and adults born through surrogacy than people on the panel. for the children that I gave birth to, they are self-assured, they are very bonded with their parents, they have a loving relationship with me. And the research has been done, studies on what children born through surrogacy feel. And it's a longitudinal study at the moment, and I think we're in the teenager phase. And we recently got feedback from that study, and I hate to say it, but the teenagers were typically unbothered. So they were typical teenagers in the fact that they were completely unbothered by the fact that they were born through surrogacy. And now actually we're talking, you know, how we all feel about surrogate grandchildren being born, now that these children are in their 20s, and talking about that. But because we have the links with them, we can see how they are. This is not abstract. We're not talking hypothetically. We know these children, we know these adults, and we can get that feedback from them. And the feedback is very much, I'm not actually that bothered about it. You know, they've got other issues, you know, they're drinking in the park and, you know, boyfriends and girlfriends. They've got normal kid issues that aren't related to the fact that they were born through surrogacy. So,
thanks, Lexi, and then we'll go out again to the
next. So, yes, that is a longitudinal study, but I was going to say that those children are, as you say, Sarah, teenagers, so they're not yet adults who are in a position to have families of their own, or perhaps not wanting to have families of their own. And I think that when you decide that you want to start a family and you think about your own childhood, you might actually return to those, to that knowledge about being surrogate born and what that might mean for you could be a different situation. We are also beginning to hear from adults who are born of surrogacy quite recently, in fact, and there's a webinar available from a woman who's called Olivia Morell, and she's been beginning to speak about this because of her particular experience of having been surrogate born. I wanted to also say that it's just this year that children who've been born from donor conception, from April the 1st of this year, they're able to find details of their genetic parentage. So they're able to find, I think, you know, the last known address, name, and some details. And it's only this year that that's happened. So it's quite possible, although not certain, that children who are donor conceived, whether they be surrogate born or not, will begin to explore this, and there could be some impact along with that.
Great, thank you. Right, now we're going to start at the back and come forward. So the lady with the stripy top right at the back.
Thanks. It's a question for Ella.
Just really speak up and hold it close.
Yeah,
thank you.
Is that better? It's a question for Ella about manipulating nature and advances in medicine and tech, which in many cases is undoubtedly fantastic, and in many cases is demonstrably not. So if you're talking about giving options for women and involving dads, if we're talking about childbirth and child rearing, in a world where we're being encouraged to see males breastfeeding as something, you know, a beautiful advancement in medicine, how far should we be manipulating nature?
Thanks for raising that image. Yes, over here with the glasses. Thank you. Tony.
Thanks very much. You couldn't see me with the pillar. Thanks very much. I'd largely go with Ella on the nurture question, but nurture takes place within a family and within the community. And one of the things that's a fascinating discussion, but has begun to make me feel really uncomfortable in the discussion, is the lack of conversation about the family and the community and the context in which children are brought up. And I have to say, Gary, the statement that the most important person in this is the baby that cannot speak, I think is probably the most dangerous thing I've heard this morning. Because it's actually, the baby can't speak, so everyone can speak on the baby's behalf. That has been the route through which governments, the government in this country, governments at the European Union, has massively intervened in family life and split the family apart. It's the idea that families can't have the best interests of the children at heart that has destroyed the family as a key unit of our society. So anyway, my basic point is, it's not really a question, is why has the family featured so little in this conversation?
Okay, thank you. Right. Yes, there's a chap there with a shirt and a shirt.
Thank you. Ella, you mentioned therapist. Well, he is a therapist. So I'm a clinical psychologist and I'm psychoanalytically trained. And I work with patients on a daily basis where we go back and we need to resolve very early attachment wounds. So we're already living in a society where reality gets disavowed. I mean, the transgender trend is the disavowal of biological sex. There's even a disavowal of species with people pretending to be dogs and whatnot. So I guess my question is, shouldn't we take the early attachment developmentally more seriously? Because after all, those babies will grow up becoming adults, mothers included.
Okay, thank you. And the chap next to you, actually, sorry, if you pass it back along. And there, yeah, somebody behind.
Hi, thank you. I've really enjoyed all the comments. I kind of feel that surrogacy does turn children into chattels. And from my point of view, it is a form of child trafficking because of that. I object to it. I really appreciate some of the views you've been giving, but a lot of people have been saying how they feel. I think that's the first time somebody's actually spoken about research and evidence. And if you look at things like, so there's Erica Commissar's book about being there, that really looks at the bond between the biological mother and the baby and how it isn't, the whole skin thing. Yeah, but there's so much more to it than that. It's a physical bond which has effects later on in life if it's breached too early. And then if you look at something like Katie Faust on Them Before Us, and again, picking up on the issue that we shouldn't let the government decide what's happening to children and to do what they want with families per se, but actually putting the needs of children before the desires of adults is something which reflects a healthy society. And I think we've got that a bit wrong.
Okay, thank you. Just behind you, right behind you. No, behind the chap who just spoke. Yep.
Thanks very much. Just 2 quick comments. The one is about these very, very early contacts between mother and baby. What about all those women and men whose babies go into special care for anything up to 2 weeks, 2 months, even longer? That kind of separation is very routine, actually, in any developed Western country. So I think, fetishizing that bond, I think, is actually mistaken. It's to say that anyone whose child has been in special care for a long time, is somehow going to be, bringing up a child who's really very deficit in that sense. The other point I wanted to make was about adoption. Because for most parents who can't conceive and bear a child naturally, there are 2 choices. One is surrogacy and one is adoption. There's no other way, unfortunately, at the moment, because we're not technologically involved enough. Adoption is no easy choice, believe you me. The number of children who are born, who are really babies and have been given up for adoption for various reasons as babies, is minuscule. Babies today who put up for adoption come with a very bad history in most cases, right? So for people who are making that choice to adopt, it is a major, major decision. And for many people, the option of surrogacy is much, much easier in some ways because they know that they are going to be bringing up somebody who has been often very damaged.
Okay.
With a lot of problems.
But what you could say is that adoption of that model was about altruism by the adopting parents. And now we're talking about the altruism of the surrogate and the intentions of the intended parents is something very different. Okay. The chap in the glasses over here.
I'll put it out, please.
No, you need microphones.
Hi.
It's you. I didn't see it. Yes, it's all right. No, you go first, and then
you handed it to me. Both Sarah and Gary have mentioned this with regards to the commercial side of things. As I understand it, commercial surrogacy is legal in the UK as long as you do it outside of the UK. With the new legislation that's being proposed, will that get rid of people doing this outside of the UK or not?
Okay. Thank you. Yep, chap behind.
Thanks. This is coming back specifically to something Gary said. So this is about higher rates of postpartum depression in surrogates. I'm looking at a study now, Lambert et al. From 2018, which does say, yes, there's more postpartum depression among surrogates, but it says this is mostly associated with the fact that they've got to hide the pregnancy. So being a surrogate is considered a little bit, well, shameful, I guess. Possibly it's always going to be that way, but, well, it seems a little bit sad to be saying, well, to give that as a reason to be against surrogacy, when it's kind of the world around the surrogates that's making it hard for them.
Okay, thank you. And lady, I can't see whose hand that's attached to, but whoever's got the hand up at the very back, yes, thank you.
So, good morning, and thank you.
Would you like to stand up so we can see? That's it, thank you. I can already see your little hand.
Good morning, and thank you so much. I just wanted to ask, when talking about the child after birth, thinking that the person that gave birth to them didn't actually want them, couldn't you turn it on its head and be like, their parents, the ones that are actually taking care of them, wanted them so much that they were willing to go to like extreme extents, such as surrogacy, in order to have them?
Thank you. Right, no heckling. We've done really well so far. So, yes, a chap here with the green T-shirt. Sorry, yeah, you can fight over him.
Is there any moral obligation on the surrogate mother after birth? So Sarah mentioned maintaining a relationship, but is that a moral obligation or just for want of a better way of saying it, nice to have?
Okay, thank you. I'm just wondering what I might do actually is just get all the questions in, and then you can all come back over in the last 10 minutes. So you can just all come back on whatever you like. Lady in the woolly jumper.
Thank you. And this is just to push on something that quite a few questioners have already touched on, which is like actually how much research is there? So Sarah, you've kind of mentioned a long-term study, and Gary, you gave a very personal and your personal history. Thank you. But it strikes me that if we're talking about a change in the law and the research about how surrogacy affects the child that's been born by surrogacy, and there is lacking evidence, that is a real concern for me. So just a direct question, how much evidence is there? And, what is the research currently, and how much pressure is there for there to be more research about this?
Okay, thank you. And there's a desperate woman in a baseball cap over here. He's been waving and I forgot to look in this direction. Sorry. Thank you.
Hiya.
Do you want to stand up so people can see?
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I have listened to a lot of
and also just hold the
discussion about the nuances of surrogacy, but then really I feel like when we are given examples, it does seem to be a lot of talk of women as though we're uneducated, vulnerable individuals. My case study would be my older sister has dedicated her 20s and 30s to being a social worker for children. And she's now struggling to conceive in her early 40s. I've spoken to her before about the possibility of adoption, and as she spends most of her life clearing up the mess that parents who shouldn't have had or, were unable to look after their kids and the trauma that they've caused, she does not want to go down that route. I am fortunate that I make a comfortable salary. I'm self-employed, and I could, should I be allowed, be a surrogate for my sister. And I frankly think that I should be, and I don't think that should be anyone else's decision but mine.
Great. Thank you very much. Next to you.
Yeah. Hi. So yeah, just jumping off that point, I think that some of the arguments that here are slightly paternalistic. There's some of the arguments I think are slightly paternalistic. I know that IVF as well can be associated with, sort of higher risks, and it can be complicated in terms of it can be like multiple. There can be multiple risks, right? But women should have the autonomy to go through that. And I think, there's a lot of research, I'm sure, about what the optimal family looks like, right? But, a single mum, should she want to, should be able to have that kid. And I do believe that, women should have the right to, like, one day I'll be, a lesbian parent. Maybe there's some research that's going to come out that says the optimal family looks like man, woman, and child, right? Well, I should still have the autonomy to have that family. I don't think I think there's a lot of like, this could cause trauma. This could cause trauma. I don't know how true that is.
Okay, that's great. So you basically pointed out some of the problems we've got here, which is we can disagree over evidence arguments, over risks arguments, determinism arguments, and then also what should families look like arguments. And so there's all different kind of ways that we're all trying to come at this. And at the end of the day, the law is the thing that's had to come in to try to tidy. I mean, so surrogacy was never illegal. It's just that it started to become possible, and then it had to be regulated. That's right, isn't it? Yeah. Okay. So that's where we're at. So, lady with the volunteers T-shirt.
Just two things. The first was about skin-to-skin contact. It does happen with men as well. It happens when the mother has gone through a cesarean. So it happens in special care baby units from as young as possible. And it happens because there is good research to show that it calms the baby and it forms contact with man or woman. So it's not just the mother. Second thing is, we know from adverse childhood experiences that what happens, the decisions that mothers make in pregnancy and in parenthood and that families make, affect their children for their whole lives. And the psychologist, I think, would back me up on this, that we have to consider the whole life of a child, okay, because they're the adults that our society will have.
Okay, thank you. This lady here, final point, and then we'll come back to the panel.
So, Ella, I normally always agree with you often, but for me, I just think that the argument of it's just a woman's right just seems a bit circular to me, and actually sounds a little bit identitarian, which is something I can't bear. And in recent times, I've started feeling that the feminist argument just feels a bit identitarian. So if you could speak to that. And the other thing I wanted to say was there is a sort of a rationality, again, that you mentioned about, the baby in the pods is great. But haven't we become this sort of rational world where, in a way, we all intuit that it's the hard work in anything, including your family or your job or whatever, it's the hard graft that makes it meaningful. And I think that's the same with mother. That's been my experience. So if you could speak to that as well.
Brilliant. Okay, so I'm now going to come back to the panel. We've got 5, 6, 7 minutes. So this is very much the beginning of the conversation. This has been a really great discussion, I have to say. I'm really, really delighted in the breadth of views and contributions to the floor. That's great. So should we go back, go to you first, Lexi, just to sort of, you've got like a minute and a half just to kind of tackle what you want.
Okay, so I wanted to come back to the gentleman who was asking about international surrogacy and whether that would be permitted under the proposals from the Law Commission, and yes, they would be. So there's no changes to the process by which you get a parental order for a child that has been born in another country. Those changes, there's no changes to that.
Okay, thank you. Is that everything you want to say?
Well, I wanted to say just about the research point that a lady over there mentioned. So there is some research that's come out of Leicester University. It's Children's Voices. The reports have gone to the Law Commission on that. There's also a study from Dr. Kirsty Horsey from 2018 that features heavily in the Law Commission's proposals. A survey done there of, I think there's about 500 responses. About 100 responses of those are from surrogate mothers. And I think it's about 30% of those women have used their own egg for the surrogacy pregnancies. It said within the details that only 10 had been a surrogate mother for a friend or a family member, and that 2 women from that survey had given birth to 10 surrogate babies, and we refer to that as serial surrogacy. So I think in terms of research, there is some research out there. If you want to see me afterwards, I can certainly share some more with you. But that's some recent UK research that you could refer to, 2018.
yeah, there's loads you can look up on this. There is a lot out there. Thank you. Right, Sarah.
So yeah, I've got a few points that I want to make. The main one is about the law reform. So the law reform came about 10 years ago with the surrogacy community identifying risks and saying, actually, if we don't start changing the law now, surrogacy is growing and these risks are going to become an issue. Because before that, surrogacy was self-regulated. Well, that's not a good, scenario to have, that it's self-regulated. So 10 years ago, we recognised those risks and started pushing for law reform. So by opposing the law reform that's going through at the moment, it won't result in surrogacy being banned. All it will do is it will result in surrogacy remaining the same. And what we wanted regulation, we wanted safeguarding, mandatory safeguarding. And a lot of issues that people have spoken about today can actually be actually won't happen where if the law reform goes through, because there will be regulation, there will be safeguarding, there will be requirements that surrogates have to meet. So it's really important to recognise that this law reform isn't a new thing. It's been ongoing for 10 years and it comes from within the surrogacy community. We recognise that there are risks and we want to address them. So that's why the law reform came about. When we're talking about risks to surrogates with regards to higher risks in surrogate pregnancies. Actually, we're talking about higher risks in IVF pregnancies. And we can't use research from the States. And the reason that we can't use research from the States is because the States have very different protocols for IVF, for a start off. In the UK, surrogates prefer natural or mild IVF, which has very, very different outcomes. And also, we could get into a discussion about maternity care in the US versus maternity care in the UK. So there are very distinct differences. So we have to make the research that we look at and we use UK specific, because there are major differences there, and we have to recognise that when we're looking at research. There is a lot of research out there. Vasanti Javda, she does a lot of research on surrogacy, as well as Susan Gollenbach. So definitely look into that research on UK surrogacy cases when you're coming back with arguments and you want to look at risks and things like that.
Brilliant. Thank you. Gary.
Thank you. I'm a bit more sceptical about that, Sarah, because the study that my colleagues carried out in California, in that study, all of the women both had their own non-surrogacy births, spontaneous births, and surrogacy births, and the outcomes were adjusted for that fact, and they were also adjusted for gravidity, how many times each woman had become pregnant, and adjusted for their age. So you were comparing this subset that were all being treated the same way in the same country, and we're seeing very different outcomes depending on whether they were having surrogacy pregnancies or not. So I think it's very relevant to what's happening in the UK. There was a gentleman who said he was quite shocked that I made the statement, the baby's rights are what should be central. And I'm a bit shocked. That was shocking to the gentleman. Sorry, I'm a bit shocked. That was shocking to the gentleman. Thank you. I'd never turn those down because even though adults will disagree, and of course I agree with him that the state is intervening, taking away parental rights that the parents should have. I'm more inclined to support the traditional family. I came from a traditional family myself. I think it's got a lot going for it. I'm very concerned about the effects on Western civilization of the undermining of the traditional family. But I think we must say the baby's rights are central here, because even if adults disagree, even if the adult in Parliament or your local authority disagrees with other adults who are trying to defend the rights of the children, it doesn't mean that the outcome of that is you should say, well, no adult should be involved in trying to protect these children. There should be a discussion among adults, and those adults who are really concerned should do their best to protect the rights of the children. That's it, is it?
Wonderful.
Okay.
And Ella. Thank you.
Listen, how can we know what will affect a child? And I'm not talking about, there are obviously clear things like, very serious trauma, illness, death, sickness, people living through wars, children go through all kinds of things. Just look at what's happening across the world at the moment. But we seem to fixate on early years trauma not being that, your whole family are wiped out in an earthquake. but that maybe your mother didn't hold you to her bare breast after birth. I mean, I just shouldn't be a therapist. I don't have time for that shit, basically. And daddy issues or whatever, I think are a scourge of a younger generation. In relation to trans and male breastfeeding, I think anyone who advocates for that needs to be forced to take a shot of whatever's coming out of that guy's nipple before they're allowed to advocate for it. It's just nonsense. It's just idiocy. We should have no time for that. But crucially, we shouldn't allow that rather perverse direction in which women's bodies and men's bodies are being discussed have an effect on the way in which we value and stand up for women's freedom and women's bodily autonomy. It can't be, and it would be unjust and terrible to say that this mad world of gender ideology was allowed to change the way we talk about ourselves and the way we talk about our decisions as women. Let's just be really clear here. If we're suggesting that a child who is not raised immediately and thereafter by the woman who gave birth to him or her, from whose body they came, that they will be somehow damaged or deficit, as Jenny said at the back. Does that mean I can't go back to work as a mother? Does that mean I can't go to the cinema of a Saturday night? What is the extent to which women are allowed to be separate from their children in order for it to be acceptable for you guys? What role do fathers play in this? I mean, Tony raised a crucial point, last point, about family and community. Absolutely. Why does it have to be based in the biological? I think we're all sensible here. We know that there is that thing that happens when you have your own kid, and there's that thing that happens when you give birth, and it's wonderful. But should it be the basis over which we stress the importance of family and community? I think it's bad for women's freedom. It's bad for our sense of community and family as well, because it takes a village to raise a child. How about reinstating some of those values in this discussion?
You've just quoted Hillary Clinton, Ella.
Fair enough. I'll give her that one.
Well, thanks ever so much to our panel, and thank you to the room. And come back here in half an hour for Feeding Babies Is Breast Always Best? Thank you.